In 1995, the man who built Apple Computer, who had given it his name, his obsession, and 10 years of his life, was escorted out of the building he had created. He did not resign. He did not retire. He was fired. By his own board. From his own company. And what happened next is one of the greatest comeback stories in the history of human ambition. One that would not only save Apple from bankruptcy, but turn it into the most valuable company on earth. This is the real story of Steve Jobs, not the one they put on posters, the one with the pain, the failure, and the 12 years it took to come back. Stephen Paul Jobs was born on February 24, 1955, in San Francisco, California. His biological mother was an unmarried graduate student who made the painful decision to give him up for adoption. He was adopted by Paul and Clara Jobs, a machinist and an accountant who had no college degrees, no inherited wealth, and no connections in the tech world. What they had was a garage. Paul Jobs taught young Steve how to take apart machines and put them back together, how to care about the details, how to look at a broken thing and see what it could become. Steve was restless, brilliant, and difficult in school. He got bored easily. He pushed back against rules he thought were pointless. He was the kind of kid teachers didn't know what to do with. At 17, he walked into Atari's offices without an appointment and told them he wouldn't leave until they gave him a job. They hired him, not because of his qualifications, but because of the sheer force of his will. And in 1976, in that same family garage, 21-year-old Steve Jobs co-founded Apple Computer with Steve Wozniak and Ronald Wayne. Their first product was a circuit board. Their first office was a bedroom. Their first goal: change the world. In 1984, Apple launched the Macintosh. The launch ad aired once during the Super Bowl and became one of the most famous commercials in history. Steve Jobs was on the cover of every major magazine. Apple was valued at nearly $2 billion. He was 30 years old and it looked like nothing could stop him. But behind the scenes, things were falling apart. Jobs was notoriously difficult to work with. He could be brilliant and brutal in the same breath, praising someone in the morning, destroying their confidence by afternoon. Sales of the Mac were disappointing after the initial launch. The board lost confidence. And the man they had brought in to be Apple's CEO, John Sculley, who Steve himself had recruited with the now famous line, "Do you want to sell sugar water for the rest of your life, or do you want to change the world?" turned against him. In May 1985, Apple's board voted to remove Steve Jobs from all operational responsibilities. He was stripped of his role. He was 30 years old. He tried to start a new division within Apple. They rejected it. And so in September 1985, Steve Jobs resigned from the company he had built from nothing and sold all but one share of his Apple stock. Publicly, he smiled. Privately, he described those months as the most devastating of his life. What Steve Jobs did next is what separates the people who come back from the people who don't. He didn't retreat, he rebuilt. He founded a new computer company called NeXT. Critics called it overpriced and impractical. It never achieved mass-market success. But here is what people always miss. While NeXT was struggling, Steve Jobs bought a small graphics company from George Lucas for $5 million. That company was called Pixar. Pixar almost destroyed him financially. He poured over $50 million of his own money into it over 10 years, convinced that computer animation was the future of storytelling. Most people thought he was wrong. Every studio in Hollywood passed on them. In 1995, Pixar released Toy Story, the first fully computer-animated feature film in history. It made over $360 million at the box office. Steve Jobs was a billionaire again, but not because of computers, because of a toy cowboy and a space ranger. And then came the phone call that changed everything. By 1996, Apple was in crisis. The company that had once been worth billions was weeks away from bankruptcy. They had been beaten by Microsoft. They had lost their direction. Their products were a mess. In desperation, Apple's board did the one thing that must have felt unthinkable. They called Steve Jobs. Apple acquired NeXT for $429 million, and Steve Jobs came back, not as an employee, not as a consultant, as the man in charge. Within a year, he had cut Apple's product line from 40 products to 4. He killed everything that didn't matter. He launched the iMac, a colorful, beautiful, affordable computer that didn't look like anything else on Earth. Apple went from losing over $1 billion a year to profitable within 12 months. And then came the iPod, the iPhone, the iPad, the App Store, iTunes. By 2011, Apple was the most valuable company in the world, worth more than Microsoft, Google, and Amazon combined. The man they had fired, he had built all of it. Steve Jobs once said, and I want you to really hear this, that getting fired from Apple was the best thing that ever happened to him, because the heaviness of success was replaced by the lightness of being a beginner again. He went away, he suffered, he learned, he built something new, and when he came back better. Here is the lesson nobody puts on a poster: the failure doesn't define you, the return does. If this story moved you, subscribe, because every week we bring you the real stories behind the world's most extraordinary rises, the full version, the painful version, the one that tells you the truth about what success actually costs. The next story might be exactly what you need to hear.